All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shamira Foster, and I'm with the Aurora African American Health Coalition. Today is the part three of our Birth and Equity series on empowering families. Today's webinar will be led by Dr. Kelechi Ibe-Lamberts and Dr. Carolyn Rogers. Today's webinar is on understanding and addressing implicit bias in maternal health care. If you have any questions during the webinar, we just ask that you put them in the Q&A chat at the bottom, and we will answer them towards the end of the webinar.
All right, thank you for that introduction. Before we get started, I always like to go over our presentation learning objectives. The first thing we're going to do is provide an understanding of the impact of paternal involvement on maternal and infant health outcomes. Second, we're going to identify barriers to Black father involvement in maternal health and birth equity. Number three, we're also going to explore the role of Black fathers as advocates for maternal health and birth equity. And four, we plan to implement best practices for promoting father engagement during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So let's go ahead and get this presentation started. I always like to start out with some introduction material so that you can understand how important this issue is. So if we look at a little bit of the statistics in terms of maternal mortality, we know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications compared to white women. And that source is from the CDC. Approximately 84% of pregnancy-related deaths are considered preventable. So that's very powerful. Keep preventable in mind. Again, that source comes from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. In terms of infant mortality, we know that Black infants are more than twice as likely to die before their first birthday compared to their white infants and counterparts. And Black infant mortality rates are at 10.6 deaths per 1,000 live births, whereas white infant mortality rate is at 4.5 deaths per 1,000 live births. Again, this is a source that comes from the National Vital Statistics Report. And this data was from 2023. In terms of preterm births, Black women have a 50% higher risk of preterm birth compared to white women. That source comes from the March of Dimes, and that data is from 2023. So again, you can see the importance of this topic and why we're speaking on it today. Now, in terms of birth equity and our goal is to ensure that all birthing people achieve optimal maternal and infant health outcomes. This is regardless of race, this is regardless of ethnicity, this is regardless of socioeconomic status. It requires eliminating the racial disparities that we have. It requires eliminating and addressing any systemic barriers and promoting culturally appropriate, respectable care. So that is what the birth equity goal is. And this source comes from the National Birth Equity Collaborative. So this is information that people got together to discuss, and this is where we are today.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. So I'm going to come in and speak a little bit more about why fathers, specifically why Black fathers, matter. In this case, infant and maternal health disparities, when we think about the impact that they have regarding that, Black mothers are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications. So fathers play a role as a protective factor. Which means that they serve as a way to limit or minimize these, reduce the gap in terms of these rates that Black mothers suffer from who have babies without the fathers involved or without the fathers involved with the pregnancy process. A study that was done in 2013, there are other studies that actually was done in 2017 as well that shows that engaged fathers have improved or result to improve birth and child health outcomes. Also, when it comes to just the birth equity goal that was just discussed, infant mortality, maternal child care is not just simply a mother thing, it's a family thing. And so having fathers involved in it and ensuring that all families have fair access to high quality maternity care is very important in terms of reducing those gaps. And fathers involved in it. So continuing on that, right? Having Black fathers involved in Black mother and maternal and child health care is important, because when we talk about the preterm birth rates, when we talk about low birth weights, having fathers involved with that can also help reduce that. It also helps with reducing maternal stress. So when we think about from a mental health standpoint, a mixed method study was done on families, Black families, specifically focused on the roles that Black fathers play. And in terms of just having co-parenting strategies, teamwork strategies, planning, family planning collectively, it showed that it helped reduce the mental health illness or mental illness among the mothers, lower negative health outcomes mentally, and improved overall mental health. And also, it just has an improved likelihood of breastfeeding success as well. So when fathers are involved, you are able to have support. Mothers are able to work on latching with their babies, and they're able to now have better connections when it comes to breastfeeding. But overall, we tend to face barriers as Black fathers in being involved in maternal and child health. And so, of course, we know there are some systemic barriers in place in terms of just racism, and these racial disparities are a product of these systemic barriers when it comes to access, having proper navigation tools to help support mothers, or even just be able to navigate properly and find the right resources to support pregnant mothers or pregnant mothers. And so, of course, when we think about discriminatory health policies that limit father engagement, so most healthcare facilities, sometimes, or hospitals, tend to have things or rules or policies in place that do not necessarily involve the fathers. And so the fathers have very limited involvement in that. And this is according to a study that was done in 2021, which also impacts their ability to be able to contribute positively to the pregnancy experience, or even the neonatal stage. And the socioeconomic factors also play a role. Employment instability also affects healthcare access as well. If there are systemic barriers in place that prevent Black men from being able to have jobs and not being able to have the opportunities to be able to care for their families, care for their pregnant partners, or even care for their newborn babies, it makes it very difficult to be able to contribute and be a supporting contributor to the process. And then, of course, limited father-focused prenatal education, meaning there are just not enough information or places where men can learn, or fathers can learn, how to properly assist their partners or their wives who's pregnant with whatever they need during these prenatal stages, teaching fathers how to properly support, how to properly use tools, how to properly help and ask the right questions when in the hospital or when at the doctor's appointment. All those things prevent from being able to have the knowledge to be able to contribute properly to the process when having a pregnant spouse or a pregnant partner. In the cultural and historical context, of course, it kind of influences that with mass incarceration. When you have many Black men that are in jail, when there's structural racism and different tropes that prevent Black men from being able to progress and be involved, it completely increases the disparities that are involved. If you're in jail, can't be present for your pregnant spouse or pregnant partner. So I want to share a really quick video. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I'm sure you all are familiar with Sterling K. Brown. If you're not, if you haven't watched Paradise yet, then I don't know what you're doing, but this is a really good story.
So she comes crawling out of the bathroom, and she's on all fours on the bedroom floor. I said, come on, let's go to bed, baby. Everything's gonna be all right. And she says, I need you to get out of this bed and come rub my back. And I was like, all right, I know that. Let me get up, rub this woman's back. We have 2 natural childbirths. Both of them transpired in our bedroom, on the bedroom floor. Andrew, our first child, was born at 2:23 in the morning. Amari was born at 5:40 in the afternoon. We knew that we wanted to have natural childbirth each time. Because Ryan made me watch, or not made me watch, he said, watch this with me. And we watched The Business of Being Born, right? Ricky Lake's documentary about how things are being geared towards C-sections in hospitals, and they get you Pitocin, and then the contractions get more intense, and then all of a sudden they gotta go in, snip, snip, snip. She said, I don't want that. She said, I would love to have my babies naturally. I think that my body is meant for this. I said, I support you, right? And what I wasn't prepared for was the level of strong opinions of people who thought that we were cuckoo for cocoa, right? So we went to a birthing center and we took birthing class. And what I love about the midwifery practice is there's something very whole person about it. It wasn't just sort of going in every 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 weeks for a checkup and doctor telling you you're good, you got checking your vitals, doing a quick ultrasound or what have you. But you're there like, they took your blood pressure. They asked like how you were eating, how you've been drinking with your water. You know, have you been exercising? Like there's something very catering to the whole person. So it put Ryan at ease in a way that her OBGYN by himself could not, because the first time we did concurrent care. So we would go see her Western medicine OBGYN, and then we would go see the midwife. Every time she went to go see the OBGYN, and she felt a little stressed out, you know? And he's like, I don't know why you try to do this craziness. You know what I'm saying? All kinds of things can happen with a child. And I was like, all right, well, there are concerns. And the midwifery practice said, like, if you are beyond a certain point, like if you are 10 days past your due date, then you have to go to the hospital. What I loved was how well she felt taken care of. And so we were going to go to the birthing center for Andrew. And her mom came early because she thought Andrew was going to, her mom thinks she has silence. And so she thought Andrew was going to be born at a certain time. And Andrew was a week late. So she was hanging out for a while. We were watching a rerun of the BET Awards. And her mom's like, well, I'm gonna leave you guys to it. And I'm like, all right, see you later. She left at 11 p.m. and Ryan had her first contraction, right? And Ryan was like, ooh, what's that? I was like, I didn't know it was a contraction, right? Because I'm timing stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like 15 minutes later, she had another one. And she's like, oh, man, that's crazy. And I was like, ah, that is kind of crazy. I was like, but everybody tells you you can't, your first baby's gonna take like 24 hours. You know what I'm saying? Have a glass of wine, try to get some rest, blase skip. So this broad is laying down in bed. She's got this hypnobirth thing that she's listening to. We are crunch, but like she's even crunchier than. She's listening to her hypnobirth thing, trying to go to sleep. After 20 minutes, she's like, I gotta get up. I gotta use the bathroom. I was like, okay. So I'm laying down in bed. It's like almost midnight. She comes back to the bed after she uses the restroom. She's like, okay, cool, cool, cool. Listens to hypnobirth, and she's like, I gotta use the bathroom again. So then the contractions start coming even more frequent. And I'm trying to coax her back to bed because they tell you can't happen that fast. So she comes crawling out of the bathroom and she's on all fours on the bedroom floor. I said, come on, let's go to bed, baby. Everything's gonna be all right. And she says, I need you to get out of this bed and come rub my back. And I was like, all right, I know that. Let me get up, rub this woman's back. So you're doing all these things to where you're like, you lift the hips, you push them together to try to relieve pressure off the lower back. And that works for a second, and then it doesn't. So we go through all these things, and she's like, I think I'm crowning, right? I said, sweetheart, you can't be crowning. It's way too soon. She's like, all right. So she picks up the phone and starts dialing 911. And I'm calling the midwife because they have a hotline for the midwife. But at the end of the line that they give you, there's another number that you have to listen for if it's an emergency. So you have to listen to the message for the new number at the end. And every time we get to the end, so I can write down the new number to call, Ryan has a contraction. Now, at this point, she's a grad school trained actress. who speaks in the diaphragm. So every time she has a contraction, it's like, "Ah." I said, sweetheart, I can't go to mom. So I have to call back multiple times. She gives me her phone. I got like the dispatcher saying, like, is there emergency? I said, yeah, we can use the paramedics. We're at this address. And they're like, okay. The paramedics are coming. I finally get the midwife on the phone. And I put her on speaker. And I look down in between Ryan's legs. Not only is she crowning, but Andrew's head is all the way out. She's on all fours. I look in between her legs, his head's out. Midwife, ice cold. She's like, oh, that's fantastic. She said, just wait for mommy to push again and collect the baby and place him on her on mommy's chest because we didn't know what would happen, so they can start bonding.
All right, just for the sake of time, such an amazing story, and he's such a great storyteller. But for the sake of conserving time, I just wanted to show you an example of a father that is very, and I mean very well versed and proficient in knowledge of supporting a pregnant spouse in this case. You know, and just the detail in the that he shares with the information and how he goes about supporting her in terms of just even knowing the time of her contractions. And that is what we want to see more of. Even for me as a father, you know, being able to have 3 kids, but being able to be present for 2 of the births was, you know, 2 different experiences, but it was something that I wanted to be able to be heavily involved in. And I wanted to be able to know as much as I could, be there as much as I could. I went to every appointment, made sure that I needed to, you know, do whatever I needed to do in order to make sure that my wife was felt comfortable, was at ease. We didn't do anything that was a natural birth, right? We went to the hospital and we ended up delivering it actually via C-section. So, you know, the first pregnancy, I'll have to say, as far as just giving a testimony, first pregnancy was at least was very smooth. I think I would say it was one of her happier times. She had a blast. And, you know, dressed up the day of, she made sure she found a nice outfit. Like, you know, everything was amazing. We went to the, even before then, went to the, every appointment we had, everything was good, you know, genetic testing, like we had asked the right questions, you know, and of course, like I do have a little bit of a privilege and knowledge because my wife's a pediatrician, right? But even with that, right, I always try to explain, even going back to when we talk about the disparities among Black women, right? Even regardless of education, you still have a lot of Black women who are highly educated, who still have poorer outcomes, birth outcomes compared to white women who are not as educated. A Black woman with a PhD or an MD will still have worse outcomes compared to a white woman that doesn't. So we had to make sure that we tried to take the primary preventative measures in order to ensure that we were going to have a safe and healthy delivery. And so that was the first one. And the second one was not as comfortable and it was not as fun. But we still tried to do what we could. I definitely made sure that I can create an environment that was comfortable, that was warm, and made sure that every time I went to the appointment, I was asking the doctors questions in relation to what type of support that I can provide during these different the different trimesters that we were going through. So it's very important, I thought, and I think that, you know, if given opportunity, I'm sure my wife would say that the support really helped her process as best as it could. So that's kind of what we want to see more from other Black fathers supporting Black mothers. So this slide, as you're seeing, just talks more about the best practices for supporting Black fathers to continue to remain that way. How can we be able to help ensure that? First is to have healthcare systems changes to encourage paternal involvement. We also want to see more community-based interventions or programs, right? And then we also want to equip Black fathers with knowledge and advocacy skills. And I'm going to go into depth regarding each 3 points. So when it comes to healthcare system changes, right, to encourage paternal involvement. We want to have more father-inclusive prenatal and birthing programs. There's some really cool programs that in some places that are happening that make sure that fathers are trained and educated on the prenatal stages, and then also what to do after, right? So as we saw in the video, understanding what specific terms are we use for specific tools and practices, especially if you want to have a natural birth, maybe compared to a C-section. And then the next thing is to reduce implicit bias and also provide more training for providers in the hospital or clinical settings. Many times, a provider that's untrained might see a father and just assume, based off their implicit biases, that this father does not know what's going on, or this father is not involved, or this father does not want to be involved, or the father is not as educated, because that is how they naturally view us. And so it's important to be able to train providers to understand that there are certain ways you can go about engaging fathers to make sure that they are aware and they understand what's happening, making sure that when you are in your appointments that you are including them in the conversation, that you're asking if they have any questions, or you're trying to make sure that you're looking at them and not just the mom when you're talking to them. So those are different ways in which you can be able to show and engage fathers. And also, of course, as you're talking to the mother and training and educating her, that you're also talking and training and educating the father as well. And so before I'm remiss, there's a really cool program actually that Rush Hospital did, where they had fathers. They brought in fathers to. They gave them the support in terms of being able to provide not just prenatal training and education, but they also were able to now create pathways for employment or providing any type of financial support, or just pathways to be able to create some level of financial stability to be able to overcome those particular barriers that they may face. Because of course, if they don't feel like they're financially stable, or they don't feel like they have a path to being able to get some level of employment, then you're defeating the purpose, because they don't feel like they'll be able to contribute. So it was a really neat program that Rush's University Medical Center did. It was called Preparing for Fatherhood. It was an inclusive model. And it's one of those things that we hope to be able to see replicated in other spaces and other settings. Okay, so community-based interventions, right? So in having doula dads, right? I know most of the time when we think about a doula, we're thinking about someone that is female or someone that's a woman. In this case, we've seen an increase, or at least we're trying to promote the increase in exposure of men who also aspire or want to be doulas, doula dads, right? And so that's a really cool program. As you saw in the video, Sterling Brown is also an acclaimed doula dad. So we're trying to see more of those fatherhood support networks where fathers can be able to learn and just be a support and engage in doula training, so that they can be able to guide and help their partners or the mothers through their process of pregnancy, during the prenatal and even postpartum, figuring out how to, or demonstrating how to keep them calm, relaxed, helping with breastfeeding, or even providing some level of support when the mother's breastfeeding, making sure that she's comfortable, making sure that the baby has what they need, changing. It goes beyond changing diapers, is ultimately what I'm saying. And then, of course, there's another program called Fathers Uplift, where it offers mentorship, where fathers can mentor fathers on how to properly, support their partners going through the pregnancy, or just personally help them process mentally what they're going through. And that's something that I'm not part of a program like that initially, but just in other conversations that I've personally had with new fathers, or fathers that are with expecting mothers, there's a mental shift that occurs where they realize that their lives are about to change, and they don't realize the extent in how their lives are going to change for the better. And so being able to guide them through, just, hey, once the baby's here, right, this is how you bond with them. This is kind of what you might expect. This is how you might, when it comes to sleep, when it comes to, when that baby feeds for the first time, this is what you want to do. These are the types of, this is how you want to hold the baby, right? Just being able to provide some information and just have a presence that young fathers who may not know who have your trust can rely on and continue to lean on you for support. So we are looking for more of those community-led programs to be able to help fathers support fathers. And as their children grow, they're able to do that. And as new fathers are coming in, they're able to mentor and guide them along the way. And then, of course, having Black-led maternal and child health initiatives. So not just supporting dad, but of course, Black men supporting moms and providing and advocating, I should say, from a policy standpoint, and even just from a support and resources standpoint, being able to go out and advocate for the needs for Black mothers in order to fight some of the systemic barriers that are in place. So Black Mamas Matter is an example of an organization that's out there right now where fathers and men are leading the charge to be able to advocate for the improved maternal health for Black women. All right, and the last thing is equipping Black fathers with knowledge and advocacy skills. So just segueing from the last point, that being able to have education on prenatal and postpartum care, and I want to place, I know sometimes we tend to believe that postpartum is right after the baby comes and then they're good. And I want to be able to stress and advocate for those for fathers who are new or going through the neonatal stage. Postpartum goes beyond that. Postpartum can be months, it can even be years. But you want to make sure that you are knowledgeable of what the triggers and the signs are for that mother, and understand how you can properly provide the appropriate support at that stage, at that time. It can be in waves. And so you just have to make sure that you understand that it's not just right after. There have been many a times and many instances where fathers assume or presume that once the baby's here, and the mother should be okay, that postpartum care is over. And so understanding not just care for the baby, but also care for the mother after the birth is very, very important, right? So I don't want to necessarily just say prenatal is key, but both aspects are important as well. And then also knowing your patient's rights and advocating in hospital settings. Again, we want to make sure that we are fighting against not just the biases, but also just the inherent racism that is within the systems in healthcare. And so understanding what your rights are. I know a very popular situation that you all know about is Serena Williams when she was having her daughter, and being a Black woman, even being a celebrity, being one of the most popular, most successful athletes in the entire world, still had to advocate for pain medicine from the doctors over there who did not believe her, who did not believe that the pain threshold she was going through was that much. So even with all that, having someone, and I'm not saying that she didn't have a man or she didn't, but being able to have the back of your partner and being able to advocate to those providers to let them know that, no, like, hey, she is going through pain. Like, I need you to do something for this. If she says she needs this is not her playing or lying. You have to be able to step up and be able to support your partner in that, right? And being able to know exactly what rights you have in those settings is critical, especially during the time where she's in labor, when she's already going through something, and she may not be able to talk that much, and you're going to have to uplift the voice for both parties involved. Right. And then, of course, encouraging mental health support for Black fathers, like I said earlier, just being able to have space where, yes, mothers are definitely going through that process, but as supporting fathers, you're also going to have your ebbs and flows mentally. You're going to have your highs and lows, and being able to have the proper resources when you might be having some down moments, and understanding what to do to be able to cope. You might have some triggers, there might be some stressors, and you have to be able to know you have to have the skills and knowledge to be able to manage those things and tap into the right resources, or like I mentioned earlier, having the right support group to be able to guide you through those things. A very important area of pregnancy, just speaking from my own experience, is sympathy weight. That is the thing. And I think people don't always talk about that all the time. But if you are in it with your partner, you're in it sometimes, and you might find that you're going to gain. Most pregnant women are expected to gain at least what, 40 pounds. You might catch half of that. And that might just be part of your journey. And so some people don't always handle that right mentally, knowing that you've had a tremendous weight gain and understanding you might have to lose that might trigger or be a stressor for you. So being able to properly figure out how to take care of yourself mentally and also physically while still trying to support your partner that's pregnant is a very important skill that you need to have as a father. And so from a policy and structural standpoint, right, again, in order to address systemic barriers, we can't just do it on an individual level. We can't just do it on an interpersonal level, meaning it can't just be us. It can't just be us and our friends. We have to now address things where the system is involved. And so we need to figure out how we can help push and advocate for policies that expand healthcare access for Black fathers. Being able to provide Medicaid coverage for fathers would be an example. Paid parental leave, like paternity leave, being able to have that. I have to give a shout out. I know that we're in Illinois, but one of the neatest experiences I ever had was when I lived in New York, and we had, when my child was born, the support we had as far as paternal leave was incredible. I mean, I had at least like 12 weeks paid. Even I think it was even more than that. But to be able to be present for, those important days for my son and for my baby girl, and also allow for my wife to be able to relax and be there for her every waking moment was one of the best things that could happen. And so being able to have more of those in different states, that's not something that I think is very common here in Illinois. If I'm correct, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Illinois does not have those type of paternity leave policies. And then reforming hospital and maternity care practices, being able to have more culturally competent training for providers, right? Not just addressing implicit biases, like I mentioned earlier, but also having a culturally competent approach, especially when talking with Black fathers, right? And not just, it may not always just be Black African-American fathers. It could be Black African fathers like myself, right, who may have different cultural practices and cultural beliefs, right? Some people, you can't just assume that coming in that the baby already has a name. Like for me, from where I'm from, we do a naming ceremony, right? And so there's so many different, and that happens when the baby is born, right? Because we believe we have to see the baby, meet the baby, know the baby before we name the baby. So there are different cultural practices that I'm not expecting all providers to know, but we do encourage that providers know that different communities have different cultural practices. So it's important to ask. It's important to at least discuss with your patient what type of cultural practices they engage in when it comes to prenatal or even postpartum care. They vary across different groups. And fathers, you may not assume, but some of them have a role, and they'd love to be involved in that. So having some type of father inclusive maternal program that's mandated when going through hospital care, even midwifery care. All right, and then last but not least, having legislative advocacy for Black family health. So the Menendez Act and its inclusion of paternal involvement policies is an example, but then also funding more Black fatherhood initiatives and maternal health would be key. So being able to have more resources to be able to fund more Black fathers to be in different programs that train them, similar to the one I discussed regarding Rush medical center, but being able to have that not just in the hospital setting, but also in the community. It'd be nice for a community center or a birthing center to be able to have funds to be able to support fathers who want to be involved through their process of pregnancy, who want to be involved prenatal and postpartum, but may not have the ability to do so. So it'd be really amazing to have more support and resources dedicated to that. Similar to what, I mean, I know like the coalition or African American Health Coalition has the birth grant that is happening, and being able to have more funding supported to include more Black men would be a great initiative from a legislative standpoint.
All right, so thanks for providing all that information on our fathers and what and services that they can utilize, because one of the things that I wanted to address is the support that mothers do desire, and I can use my own personal experience with some of the research here. One of the main things is emotional support. Dr. Ebe Lambers did mention that, and that's some of the support that he was also able to provide for his wife. But women, we're wanting partners who provide reassurance. During the labor process, there are a lot of things that happen. Emotions flying, physical things happening to the body. So we need reassurance, we need presence, and we definitely need emotional stability. I can't tell you the amount of emotions that I went through during my own pregnancy, and I was looking for my husband to speak on my behalf because sometimes, depending on what it is you're experiencing, there's going to be things that you want to happen, and when pain is a part of that process, sometimes people will change their minds quickly and regret it later. And a lot of mothers go through that. I've experienced some of those things myself. And so it's always important to have someone there for your emotional support, but who also can react in situations where you may not be able to ensure that your wishes are being listened to. So, emotional stability during pregnancy, birth, and also postpartum. Our emotions change. Our hormones are trying to get back to normal. A woman, is lactating, feeding a baby. All of those things take precedence to our bodies. And so, there's times that we're going to need that emotional support because of a number of the things that are happening. There's weight gain. Again, your body is changing. It took 10 months to produce this child. It's going to take almost that amount of time to get back to normal. So all of those things are things that mothers do desire. We also desire active participation in prenatal appointments and birth planning. I know for me, I missed the times where my husband could not come to some of my appointments because when you're sitting in that waiting room, you feel different. You feel different when he's not there. You don't know what other people are thinking about you. All of those things cross the minds, and then you don't want to be prejudged going in there alone for some of those appointments. So active participation in those prenatal appointments is very, very important, and also the birth planning process. The birth planning process, unfortunately, many people tend to miss that, especially minorities. And a lot of times we don't know about those services. So those are things that we need to look into often and also be educated more about because some of those have to do with structural racism, things that have been built into the systems. So when we're looking at that active participation, we're looking at attending those prenatal visits. That's where you get a lot of education about the pregnancy, participating in those birthing classes, if they're even attending, because the research shows that most birthing classes, and even what the actor was speaking about with him and his wife, those centers mostly exist in affluent communities. So already that leaves out many minorities from attending to those birthing centers. And so that's one of the things we need to pay attention to. We need people to participate in those classes if we have them and if we can, if we're in those areas where they're available, because that accessibility is also an issue. Then we look at active decision making. A lot of times the woman is typically the one making most of the decisions, but we cannot uh, leave out the fathers because it takes two. And so their opinions and decisions need to be taken into consideration during the delivery and labor process as well. Um, and that's the person that we need to participate in those appointments with us because again, as I said, it goes back to the first one. If they're going to be there throughout the entire process, they'll also be the person that we're leaning on for emotional support. We're also looking for advocacy during labor, especially during labor and delivery. So we value partners who speak up. As I mentioned before, in both of my pregnancies, my husband had to speak up on my behalf. Three, I should say. Two were C-sections and one was a VBAC with the twin delivery. And so he needed to speak up for me because we had some things that went on where with the twin pregnancy, even though it was a VBAC, I actually lost one of the twins a day later. So, those are things that, we had to deal with. And so emotional support was big, active participation, but then advocacy during the labor and delivery process. I told my story in one of the last presentations about me experiencing bleeding during the pregnancy process. And because they had me in a post-delivery room, You know, those are some things that I needed a person to speak up for. Now, unfortunately, my husband hadn't gotten to the hospital yet, but my mother was there. And so she was the voice for me. So it's important to have, a participant, hopefully, the male participant be active during the labor and delivery process, speak up for us. Preferences are needed and are respected. So as Dr. Ibe Lamberts mentioned, there's cultural things that also need to be respected. And sometimes that's, it could be in food, it could be in certain things. I know there's certain cultural and also religious aspects where, when it comes to blood transfusions, that's something that has to be taken into consideration because it may not be a cultural practice that is acceptable. And then the other things that we look at too is the environments that we're in. It has to be where we limit the amount of implicit bias that occurs. I can tell you right now that that's one of the main things that we really need to look at in some of these facilities, because I know for me, I told them some of my religious practices, and it was almost like a surprise. Like, well, we didn't expect that. We thought you would be willing to eat this, and I'm like, well, no, I'm requesting these certain dinners. And it seems like when African Americans tend to do it, it's not as common, and so those are things that we need to take a look at as well. Also, we're looking for practical help in postpartum care. That's a huge one. Infant care, we need it. It takes a village. It really does. We also have household tasks. I know that, when we look at society, we tend to see women as the ones that are taking care of these household tasks. But during these times, someone else is going to need to help with the work. And so we're looking for that kind of support, and also monitoring maternal and mental health, because if a person is having a mental breakdown, they're not going to notice their own mental breakdown. They need someone else to recognize it for them. And some of those things, recognizing the signs of postpartum depression, that's very critical because I know a few years back that was, one of the new things, new buzzwords that people were talking about, and we had some specific examples we were able to point to, but now it's becoming more common, and so people need to know how to recognize those type of supports for mothers and to get them the resources that they need right away. And then the next one is a presence and connection. That is huge. We're looking for a presence and a connection. That's a continuous presence. A lot of times people tend to leave once the birth of the baby occurs, but there's a lot of things that happen after where they really need that support. And so one of those things is to reduce stress. We're also looking for presence and connection, which helps shorten labor. That's a big one because if anything that can shorten labor and reduce the amount of pain that a person is going through, that is excellent. That means we've reduced the stress level, and we increase satisfaction when we do that. So the birth experience increases when we have that presence and connection. And so those are some of the things that I know mothers desire, because those are some of the very things that I desired during my pregnancy, most of which I did receive. And so I was blessed to have that. But not everybody is blessed to have that. And so that's why we have, resources such as doulas and things of that nature to assist in those services. And so at this time, we're going to go to our next slide, which is our conclusion and call to action.
Yeah. So some key takeaways that I want you all to just hopefully take from this talk is: one, Black fathers do and are significantly impactful to maternal and infant health. There's so much to show. There's so much evidence now that shows the involvement of Black fathers through this process and what it does for the health outcomes of mothers and their children. These systemic barriers limit the involvement, but they can be addressed. Right? So we do not just want to stop at the barriers that face us. The goal is to overcome it. The goal is to utilize our network, our resources to achieve and attain the proper education to overcome those barriers. But we can't just do it on an individual level. It can't just be me. It just can't be me and my wife or me and my community. It has to also be from a policy standpoint. There has to be policy changes, systemic changes that are in place that help inform and infuse the creations of community programs and advocacy efforts that can empower Black fathers for birth equity and continual support for mothers. And so I do want to call to action for fathers to engage in prenatal and postpartum care. Again, and when we talk about prenatal, and one thing that I do want to also say when it comes to that is that when we talk about complications, when we talk about miscarriages, right? That's something I know sometimes is not a comfortable conversation that people want to have. And I know certain cultures, people want to hide that. It's considered taboo talking about those things. But for fathers who are going through those processes with their partners or their expecting mothers, it's very important to also be equipped on how to support them through that. I mean, it's also a mentally anguishing thing for the father, but also for the mother as well. So being able to know and have the tools to go through, to cope through that is critical. And then for providers, we want you and we call for advocating for inclusive maternity care policies. And for the community members, we want to continue to find ways to support father-focused initiative and advocates for policy changes. So include us, bring us in. Don't just assume that men are men and men just gonna go watch. Like, please continue to hold men accountable, hold fathers accountable, and try and bring them in. Let them learn. Let them be part of that process. Continue to push and let them know that it's okay, and continue to reassure and encourage. I personally believe that it's good to see that type of support from the community. Even though as a father, I knew what I was going to do and I was going to do it regardless. But getting that reassurance from my community is also empowering as well. It makes me feel good, and it continues to push me to continue to do that and push other brothers, other fathers, and expecting fathers to go the same route. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your attention, your time, and Dr. Rogers, thank you so much. You want to open it up for any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Dr. Eve Lambers and Dr. Rogers. We do have a few questions, so I will read those questions to you and you guys can answer them. The first question is, what are tangible things Black fathers can do to increase maternal mortality while planning to have a child or during pregnancy?
You broke up a little bit. Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
What are tangible things Black fathers can do to decrease maternal mortality when planning to have a child or during the pregnancy?
Yeah, so definitely, I believe showing up, to going to the appointments, asking the doctor questions. I mean, I think it sounds very simple, but I'm telling you that the impact of it is tremendous, because for that mother who's going through those changes, that's going through those different experiences, being able to kind of serve as an accountability partner. If the doctor says you need to do this, right? You need to eat this, and it's something that you've agreed upon in your treatment plan. And I want to say that again, agreed upon in your treatment plan, right? Because you have to make sure it is a partnership between you, the patient, but also the provider. And in that tandem, right? Sometimes that mother going through whatever, she might have a bad day. She might be having an emotionally filled day, and she may not want to follow that regimen that was agreed upon. And it's up to you as a father to say, hey, no, like, let's do this. Like, this is important. We gotta, I know it's the tough day, but let's take that walk, right? Let's walk it. Let's go sit down, get some fresh air, whatever the case may be. But being able to be that supporting figure, especially when it comes to the treatment and whatever care plan that's agreed on, is tremendous in being able to lead to positive health outcomes. When it comes to, as mentioned earlier, when you're going through labor and now you have to make a decision, but that decision is informed by pain, but being able to have someone that says, no, like, she don't want that, right? Like, or she don't need that, we're not going to do that right now. No, like, we want to do this, and we're going to stand on that. It plays a major role when it comes to the outcomes for mothers.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback and say that emotional support thing is huge, because I can, think back to all three of my pregnancies. The first one, I did not want to have a C-section. It was actually due to failure to not progress, which really meant that I should have been sent home to go and wait until my body was ready. And so my husband really did have to speak up, because we had a plan. The plan was for me to go in and have a natural delivery, and once those contractions started to kick in, he had to take over for me. And I just told him, I said, I don't want to talk anymore, but he knew everything that I wanted. And so that emotional support, but also, as Dr. Ibe Lamberts mentioned, having a plan, because unfortunately most couples go in without a plan. They start out that way as well. They start out with a surprise pregnancy, but that's not too late to develop a plan. That's actually a great time to start developing a plan, because again, you need to know what to expect, whether it's buying, that book, What to Expect When Expecting. That's a big one that a lot of couples purchase. And that's a tangible step to start with, just to be educated and aware of what could happen and what could also go wrong. And, once you have that information in hand, you then have some solutions, or at least a playbook that you can pull from. But the first step is to have a plan. And like I said, many couples start out without a plan, or having a birthing plan to provide to a doctor. I know, unfortunately, when we look at ethnic groups, that's something that we don't typically go in with. But as parents are becoming more educated about this, and we're removing the implicit biases and structural biases, you're finding more and more younger couples actually having a plan, wanting to go to birthing centers and things of that nature, because it's becoming more and more available, because we're talking more about it.
Thank you. Thank you both. The next question is, what advice do you have for couples where the mother and father do not agree on the birthing plan, on a plan for pregnancy and delivery? For example, the mother wants a hospital birth and the dad wants a home birth.
This is interesting because, that's a good question, because I will tell you this, because my first pregnancy was a C-section, the doctors told me that my second one was most likely going to be a C-section. And my second one was actually a twin pregnancy. And I said, no. I researched that I could have a VBAC, and that was something that I had to explain to my husband, because at first we both were conflicting. I initially got a midwife. I was going to have an at-home pregnancy, and his concern was, you've had a C-section. I don't want anything, any emergencies to happen. So we had to sit down and have a real conversation about that. And a lot of couples are in that situation where they do need to have a real conversation. And I think once people come to a conclusion and are educated about what the options are, what can happen, because I ran into so many people that were uneducated about what a VBAC was. Back in the day, a lot of folks, especially older folks that were in the generation where they did not get a VBAC, it was just automatically, if you have a C-section, you're going to have another one. And we still have people in that mindset because they haven't been educated about what is the new thing that you can do. And so that was stuck in his mind, like, well, I heard, that, once you have a C-section, you have to have a C-section. I literally got into an argument with a woman who was a nurse about that, because I had the research. So it just shows you that the awareness piece is one of those key pieces that people need to be educated about. But I think the first start there is for that couple to sit down and to do the research and to find out what their options are. Because, when people look at home births, they're looking at a home birth tends to be more personable. You tend to have a little more control versus a birth in a hospital. That's one of the reasons why I looked into it. It's a little more uncomfortable. You can't have your kids involved. They don't even want them around, because these are germs. You don't want to bring anything around a newborn baby, but there are many people that want that. So I think once they write down, the pros and cons of each one and what their morals and and how it aligns with their morals and values, that's, the place to start. But it's not gonna be 100% for each couple. But if they can reason together, then that's the first place to start it, is planning.
Yeah. It's definitely, and I'll provide the male perspective in this regard. The way I look at it, and what I would encourage whoever's asking this question in that situation is, if that person, if you are the father, and this is, we're in this case assuming that this is hetero, right? So if this is the case, then the way I look at it is that it's 49-51 and I'm 49, right? Like, so the wife is 51, right? It is not as much as we want it to be. It's still her body. It is still a choice that she has to make, and it is still something that I'm going to push as much as I can, and I'm going to try and explain and reason and logically justify why I think, but I'm not the one going through it physically. So I cannot, and I usually choose not to try and tell. No, the best thing I can do is know that this person is carrying my child. I just have to make sure that whatever she's doing is going to create the best, most positive, healthiest outcome for that baby that's going to be here. That is because there is a limit. There is a limit in how far you can go. I am not the one that's pregnant. So in that case, ultimately, you want to make sure that you make the most informed decision. Meaning for you, that father needs to make sure that you're not just spewing information that you haven't done some form of research, you haven't provided some information. If it's something that the doctor said, even if your partner doesn't want that, you try to explain, you try to hold them accountable, but ultimately the decision is up to the mother, and the mother has to, the mother's the one that's giving birth to the child. You just have to defer and you have to acquiesce, and you have to just make sure that you're the best supportive partner during that process. And yeah, that is the, I would say, the most straightforward that I can be regarding that answer, because it really doesn't get any more, it can get complicated if you add other stuff to it.
All right, thank you. And the next question is, do you know of any resources for paternal postpartum depression?
Yeah, so the first one that comes to my mind is the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance. That's one that I know is very common. And this is, you're talking, I mean, well, I'm speaking for fathers, but that's usually one as far as supporting mothers. Usually I know what is it? There's another resource that kind of shows how fathers can support mothers. Daddy University, I believe, is what it's called. That's another one to help support mothers going through postpartum depression. I'm Dr. Rogers. You may have some resources specific for women, but yeah.
Yeah. Now I was just gonna say, I know that there is the Postpartum Support International. That's the only one that I know about for men, and that one is, you know, it's underreported because a lot of people don't believe that men experience that, but they actually do, and so that's one that I know about. And of course, just going to your local clinics, mental health to request, excuse me, any mental health support. But there are some applications out there too, that they're coming out with that you can, you know, in support groups that you can participate in. But the main one, as I mentioned before, is the international support group that they actually have that you can receive support from. And then also going to your local clinic to request mental health support. So that's a good question because most people don't think about it.
Thank you. Another question. What is your advice for fathers and involvement in the prenatal visits? Should I be present for all visits or just certain ones?
Yes. All of them. And again, I know I'm speaking, I know life happens, people are like, life is lifing, but yes, I don't think, I regret nothing when it comes to that. I felt so well prepared. I was very involved. Even if when I didn't have questions, I just wanted to be there, and I learned so much. Even if I had questions, I didn't care if they were stupid questions. I didn't care what it was, right? I don't think there is such thing as stupid questions in that regard as you're learning, but I didn't care what type of questions, and what I was gonna be there to ask them if I had them. And so I encourage you to be there. And like Dr. Rogers mentioned, just the support, just knowing that that person's there, it means a lot, right? Like I never, if when my wife was pregnant and if she said, "Are you coming to this appointment?" I don't even think she even had to ask, unless like she just knew, like she's like, "Oh, this is when the appointment is. We're having we're in the second trimester. This is our 12th week appointment," or whatever the case may be. And I was there. And even sometimes I just sit there, just quietly listening. It did, but I can tell that she felt comfortable being there. There's probably only like one appointment that I missed. And I mean, she knew the difference of me not being there, but I think she enjoyed just having me be there just in case. She knew I mean, she's well educated, very knowledgeable, but still being there. So someone that's a pediatrician that understands the process, but even with that, right? Just knowing that I was next to her. I mean, she always would tell me that me just being there meant a lot. And for me, I felt like that was my job anyway. So, that I highly and implore anybody that's a father, expecting father, go to all the appointments, right? And honestly, from even an emotional standpoint, not just from an objective standpoint, each child is special, right? Each child is unique. You only get one chance to truly go through this journey per each child. So why not do it? Why not go to each appointment? Why not engage as you're going through that journey with your partner to bring in this unique child to the world? So I encourage brothers to do that.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback and just tell you, we want you there, okay? Because I know for me, especially with my first pregnancy, I know I look young, and so I felt like even then, looking as young as I did, I looked a lot younger than I do now.
Mhm.
Um, you just we talk about implicit bias, and that's a real thing. That's a real thing, especially for a lot of minority women. We want to walk into a clinic and feel we are respected. And I've talked to many single women. That's not a good feeling to walk in alone. So if you have somebody there, it feels really good. But if you have the father there, it feels that much better. Now, I've told you before, my mom went to some of my appointments with me. My sister went when my husband couldn't. But when he was there, it was a big difference. I felt more relaxed. I felt more respected. And so you feel less judged.
Mm.
So a lot of single women, they experience those things, and like I said, the support is always felt, when a person shows up for you to go to some of these visits. But if the father's there, that's even better because, like I said, I can't tell you how many single women that I've spoken to that had to do this on their own. And afterwards, they have real remorse towards that father. So, and sometimes that leans into other things, with relationships that happen after the fact, with, participation in the child's life and things of that nature, because they really felt like when they needed someone the most, they were left out. A woman that is pregnant feels very vulnerable. So you feel protected when someone goes to those visits for you. And so we want you there. That's all I'm going to say. A resounding yes. We want you there.
All right, thank you so much. And the last question we will do, what are the biggest barriers preventing Black fathers from being more involved in prenatal and postnatal care?
You can talk on that one, Doctor.
Yeah. So there are a lot. Like I said, this is it's their systemic barriers are very major, right? And the systemic barriers inform the implicit biases because you come in there and it perpetuates a different stereotype on Black fathers and I'm speaking specifically to Black fathers, basically on how we should approach the prenatal stages, right? The assumption is that we don't know anything, we're not going to be involved, or sometimes they even assume that we're coming in and we're the baby daddy, and the baby daddy has a negative connotation, right, compared to being a father, right? And again, it's not to create a dichotomous thing, but I'm telling you what the mindset is when you hear that there's a different last name, right? And so all those things then lead to the presumption of lack of involvement, right? And so it's important, I think, for when it comes to the types of barriers to come in and, like I said, show up. That is the number one thing. I know I can't stress that enough. Being able to overcome that is by showing up. And when there are opportunities for you to learn, learn, get the information, know your rights, know your spouse or your partner's rights, right? Whether it's wife, you're expecting girlfriend, whatever the case may be, but know the rights for yourself and your partner in this journey and advocate, right? And you can also tell when those dog whistles or when those signs of microaggression show up in those particular settings. It's important for you to be aware and to recognize and call that out, right? And understand that these things, there are assumptions being made. You are not respecting the expertise of my lived experiences, right? And so even though you might be the expert in terms of solutions, and I am still an expert in what's happening, where I'm from, what I represent, I'm very well versed in my experiences, and I bring that to the space. And even though I may not be educated, I'm showing up because I want to be, right? And I think that's important, where I think the expectation is that for men, you're supposed to have it all figured out. And that's not the point. Like, this is a journey, and this journey you are learning. And in the process of it, do not be afraid to learn. It's not even being a man and being a protector, whatever type of masculine ideologies that you have, does not remove the idea that you can't learn. You can still learn and be as masculine or whatever you want to be. So being a man, being a protector still involves you being there to learn and be able to find ways to support your partner in this journey. So I feel like those are one of the ways, those are, out of many ways, the most important thing that I can really emphasize more than anything is that you show up, you're present, and you're engaged, right? So that is whatever type of systemic issues that are in place, you're showing up for your partner in that journey. And I think that is 90% of the work involved.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Eve Lambert and Dr. Rogers, for a great presentation. I would like to invite everyone to join us at our 18th Annual Health Fair on April 5th. I've put a flyer in the chat. We encourage you to share it with everyone that you know. We will also be having free health screenings at the health fair. I've also put that in the chat. So Empower will be doing free health screenings. Just register for the health screening. And again, share that with everyone that you know. It's great for our community. We all need to know more about our health. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you on April 5th.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.